Good evening, everyone. Once again, it's a little bit late this evening, and I'm beginning my summary of the week. Interesting week, provocative week, interesting set of comments, and dealing with this challenge of figuring out what Kugel talks about as the traditional set of assumptions and the Spinozistic. There was a little pushback on this, back and forth, so I want to give you another attempt. I've been trying throughout the week to try to help us work through this. So I'm going to do a little bit of trying again tonight and see if that helps at all. And you can offer some more comments. Maybe things will become clear. Maybe we should just hold things back for a while. Maybe it'll all become clear as the next lessons come in as well. First, I want you all to realize that I fully appreciate the traditional reading of Jewish texts through midrash, philosophy, mysticism, homiletics, and so on. Someone mentioned the idea of pardes in the Middle Ages. They came up with this idea that there's this fourfold way of reading Torah: pshat, remez, drash, and sod, the simple meaning, the philosophical meaning, the midrashic or homiletical meaning, and perhaps the mystical meaning. And each of these offers you a different way of thinking about the text. The pshat is not, the simple meaning is not exactly the same as the historical critical, because even the simple meaning assumes that it's a divine document sort of dictated by God in one way or the other. Historical critical does not take that approach. But what I'm really arguing for, talking about, is the fact that, in my view, before one ventures into the world of Midrash, one needs to have a thorough historical grounding in the language and the history of the biblical period. What did the authors of Genesis have in mind when they told the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, or the Tower of Babel? When these texts were written down, what did they mean to the people who were the original readers? There are profound issues found in these texts, and we lose them if we move immediately to the rabbinic or medieval interpreters. The academic study of these texts was the focus of Lesson 2, and the attempt in the Jewish Study Bible to bring some modern critical and some traditional modes together. Almost all the time, the commentator there, Professor Levinson, who teaches here at Harvard, is careful to tell you what he is doing, whether his interpretation is going to be midrashic, that is rabbinic traditional, or historical. We're going to look more closely at some of these historical issues this coming week when we read Babylonian accounts of creation and the flood, and ask what relation these stories might have to the stories in the Bible. We're going to be looking at the ancient Near Eastern context of the stories we have been reading about. The second issue we focused on this past week was the two stories of creation in Genesis. For 2,000 years, traditional interpreters have tried to harmonize the two stories, since they believed that the text was an integrated unity. There could be no contradictions from one chapter to another. That was part of Kugel's sense of these traditional assumptions. Starting in the 19th century, scholars became convinced that these two stories represented two different accounts of the genesis of the world, and that these two different accounts represented independent sources. They called them, the first one was P, related to the priestly document of the book of Leviticus, and the second story of creation was J or J-E, the Yahwist or Elohist, where the name of God in that document is Adonai, Yahweh, or Elohim. There are distinctive characteristics in each of these sources, often called documents. And throughout Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers, there are clear indications that the texts which we have are combinations of these documents. Leviticus is mostly the P document for the priestly, and Deuteronomy is entirely a different source called D. So that's where might have heard of something called the documentary theory, which means that, and they usually talk about 4, J, E, P, and D. The scholars has gotten a lot more complicated lately, and there's subgroups and subgroups of subgroups and so on. I'm not all that interested in the details of that, but it's clear to me that these sources were written at different times and represented different oral and written traditions among the Israelites. Reading the text with this in mind, I think, can be very illuminating. It is very helpful when looking at the two creation stories in Genesis 1 to 3. We can easily see the different perspective in the first story, which is centrally concerned with order coming out of chaos, and the orderly creation of the world. God is depicted in the first story quite differently from the way he is depicted in the second story. The second story is much messier and appears to be much more concerned with the birth of the human being and the difficulties which beset humanity from early on. God is not so all-powerful as he appeared in the first story of creation. At the same time, he has a great compassion for the human being, even as he throws him out of the garden. The story of him, Carrie, doesn't want the human being to be alone. The whole story of the creation of the woman, and the engagement that he has, the whole idea of he's walking around in the garden, and the idea somehow that he tries all these animals to see if that's going to be a proper companion for Adam or for the first human being, and decide, wouldn't God know in advance about these things? A different kind of picture of God than you got in the first story of creation. These are two different views of God. They are not contradictory. They are simply different. They provide together a deeper and more nuanced view of God than each of the stories would individually. The narrator or the redactor seems to have been totally unperturbed by the so-called contradictions or inconsistencies between the two stories. There are lots of examples in the Tanakh of repetitions, contradictions, etc. We'll see a few of those. The redactor or editor had different criteria by which he edited the contents of the book and didn't seem to be bothered by these things. As we proceed in future weeks, we will delve more into the theology of the Tanakh, the nature of the literature of the Israelites, all different ways of thinking about this material, and we will not be dealing with midrashic understandings until we get to Midrash, which will be, several hundred years later. This evening, we're beginning this new unit where we'll be looking at historical questions. We're also going to be looking at feminist readings of the Tanakh. This is sort of a new arena that only opened up 30, 40 years ago and yields very interesting ways of thinking about this kind of literature. So next week, this coming week, we'll be looking at those. It's also the case that in the next few weeks, we're going to be needing to deal with the challenge of the Jewish holidays. I certainly will be needing to deal with the challenge of the Jewish holidays, and some of you as well. This coming week is Rosh Hashanah, the new year, and we have sort of a clear week until Yom Kippur on the following Saturday, and then the holiday of Sukkot. I have given you a little less in the reading, a little less in the assignments, not a huge amount less, as you'll see. But I really do want you to try to keep up. If we start falling behind now, it won't be good. So if you can try to sort of focus your attention on getting stuff done earlier in the week. If you're going to work during the holiday, that's fine. I won't be able to be responding from Wednesday night until Saturday night or Sunday to your posts, but you certainly are welcome to put those posts up and to respond to those posts. So I will be starting canvassing about a time for office hours. Probably the first office hours we'll do will be the week between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I'll get you some more information on that. So I hope you have a very good week. For those of you celebrating Rosh Hashanah, L'Shana Tova Tikatevu V'Tekatemu, may you be inscribed and be written and inscribed in the Book of Life, whether you're celebrating the holiday, whether you're Jewish or not. I offer that same blessing to all of you. You should be written and inscribed in the Book of Life for this coming year. Good night.